This panel is really intended to be a panel to talk about where things are going, what's the view. And I thought this was a really exciting, it was exciting in this conference that we went from showing how you could do a video call to really beginning to see how applications use them. So, I think the question that came interesting is, of everything you saw this week, where did you see the most impact beyond traditional voice and video calling, the replacement for what used to be a video conferencing system? What interested you most? Anybody can start.
I'll start. It's funny. It still seems to me that it's not only the early innings of WebRTC, but the top of the first inning. And I just had to change my flight with Delta, and I had to dial into a normal IVR and deal with a person. So I'm not, there's all this stuff of what's beyond the call, but I still want to see the replacement of the call of WebRTC to get out there. So the most interesting things that I think I saw, I think the Vonage native mobile WebRTC apps for iPhone and Android was actually super interesting and a great way to go as we wait for browsers to be able to do it. But frankly, I'm a little more of rather worrying about what comes next. I just want to see what comes first.
So each one of the sort of applications and a lot of the companies we saw out here, I went and asked them about what did it take to build that? How did that all work? And that was the most thing that I found interesting is nearly everyone I talked to that had a service running or an application running had built it in probably less than 1/10 and less than 1/10 of the resources and less than 1/10 of the time of what it would have taken to do that same application 2 or 3 years ago. So I think that the speed of the development, the speed of the deployment was the thing that just hit me the most, and that was really working for people.
Yeah, I think we're in the phase. It's very, very early and tremendously early. We're in the phase of replacement of existing behavior. And I think we see this whenever digital touches an industry, just like photographs. It moved physical to digital, but then once it's digital, it changes what the physical, it becomes something else. It becomes a platform. The most interesting bit that we haven't touched is the data channel. The data channel is going to change a lot of things. It's like torrent networks, it's it's going to be interesting, this. So the gaming stuff, where you're in the game, I think the biggest thing that excites me is when communication isn't what we're looking at. It's something you do while you're doing something else.
That was actually, that's a brilliant analogy, right? I mean, if you think about photography, when you had to buy film, you made every picture count. When film became free, because it became digital, people would take 500 pictures and only take the 20 that were interesting. And I mean, it's kind of almost analogous the same way with video. The Cube Slam I thought was interesting. 95% of the time you're not watching the video, but you're willing to have it there because it's essentially free. It's a brilliant analogy of what's happened. Dean?
Yeah, I mean, I'd also say Data Channel has some huge opportunities. I haven't seen as much of it as I was expecting here. There's a tweet I put out earlier saying, okay, enough of the video conferencing and UC, let's see some robots and toasters and brain sensors. And there hasn't been that here, which is surprised me a bit. But what I'm seeing is more of the sort of background enablers, which will hopefully mean that we'll be getting robots and toasters soon.
So I'd like to move on and go to another question, if that's
Absolutely.
all right. So one of the things that I have noticed is that there's lots of hope that this is really going to work and generate somebody somewhere some money, because there's all these vendors here and they had to pay to come here. Where have you seen money in this? Because I've been trying to look at business models, and I keep hearing these words, well, new things are going to be developed that we don't know what they are yet, but they're coming. Have you guys seen something that's concrete with a real good business model, either on the enterprise side or the telco side?
Well, I actually think that the third part of it is the consumer web, which is probably underrepresented here. And I think that's where a lot of the revenue will come from. To be honest, it's where the revenue comes from for HTML generally. I'm not so certain that at the moment service providers are going to be generating new revenue out of what I've seen here today. They may have ability to stop revenue declines being quite as fast and quite as steep. Yeah, revenue for telephony is going to zero at some point, but it's best to get there as slowly as possible and with the lowest cost base. And I think that WebRTC may well help on that.
So I'll give you one example of what I think we see happening. It's actually a yoga course. Now, if you do yoga, you know that you can do a position, and unless you're in exactly the right position, you might as well not be doing it. And this yoga course included, real-time communication that says check your position. Now, that doesn't sell anything from a communication point of view, but that increases the differentiation of the yoga class to the yoga community. If that becomes important as a differentiator, then that communication has to work, which potentially allows the people who provide that capability to differentiate inside themselves. So I think the interesting part in my mind in business model is the business model moves into something else that you enable to be better because of what you are doing with WebRTC.
So in the short term, I see a bunch of technology that, as I mentioned, greatly reduces the cost of development. And I'm in an organization that spends billions of dollars every year on development. So it's a reduce of cost, very direct money there. But that directly translates into this seeing all kinds of new types of applications coming out. So, and I know you mentioned, new applications, right? But we see the communications being embedded in the tasks that you're actually doing, and that being easy for people who aren't the communication experts to just put this type of voice and video communications into the application they're experts in, into whatever their domain space is. So from that point of view, I see suddenly speeding up business on lots of things, and that will create value for customers. There will be companies that manage to monetize that value. My company will be one of them, and just more video on the network is not going to be an all bad thing for me, right?
I was going to say that potentially a lot of this comes down to generating more internet traffic, the demand for faster internet connections, which feeds through to both vendors and service providers. And for that matter, advertising providers.
And the application vendors that are building these applications that people want to use. They're very customized for a narrow market because they're fast and easy to build.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's going to be, the nice thing is it should raise the quality level of anything that's using, SIP or IP communication. So as an end user, it's going to be better, and now it's going to be cheaper and easier to develop. That customer support systems should be higher quality, and they'll be able to, again, going back to my airline analogy, boom, I'm on this page. They should be able to see, I'm trying to change my flight, and they already have all the information. So it's a much better system for them. It's going to be much cheaper to deploy. I'm going to be a much happier user, and our communication is going to be higher quality. So where's the money in that? Someone's going to make money in that.
Yeah, but before we go, Greg, so you're the guy who's doing the disruptive model already with Uber Conference. I'm an Uber Conference user. Find it very attractive. Haven't bought into the professional service yet. So talk a little bit about the model there. I know you use WebRTC. I use the WebRTC client all the time with it. So just kind of curious how it impacts you in that business model.
Yeah, well, and it totally helps. I used to do this company, Dialpad, was a PC to phone thing, and became Yahoo Voice. We did, Google Voice, and before that it was Grand Central. But as a developer in a startup without a ton of money, we never, had the resources to go license, the voice engine from Gibbs. I guess we could have, but it was pretty damn expensive. Now that's free to everyone, which is awesome. So when we're doing Uber Conference, and you're on a browser and you're seeing who's on the conference call, rather than having to dial in or call a toll-free number or enter a PIN or any of that stuff, you just click on a button. And not only do you get, a free connection from anywhere in the world, you now get a super high quality free connection from anywhere in the world using that voice engine that has, lost packet concealment and this great, echo cancellation and all these things that have been worked out, forever, that used to be a pretty expensive license to get. And then, the Chrome 29 release in August is going to have, a bug fix to the Opus Echo issue. And that Opus codec sounds awesome. It's amazingly good quality. So getting that stuff for free is crazy good, and I think any developer should be using it.
I was just going to add on for anybody in the service provider community in the audience, actually, and I was going to say that maybe one interesting thought to be thinking about right now is something called brand loyalty. And brand loyalty in our very, sterile world really comes down to churn. But the cost of churn to an operational model in our business is tremendously high. If you can actually start looking in terms of lifetime value and core business of connectivity, then the actual economic picture changes. And the big companies that are failing in my analysis across all industries are the ones that forget what their core business is. That's exactly what happened with Kodak, the newspaper industry, everybody else. They mistook their last generation's distribution capability for being their core business, and that's what actually got disaggregated.
Yeah, I mean, I concur and say that with the service providers, what I'm seeing is a move to, and this is not unusual in the US already, but bundling and putting more value over time into the bundle to defray reduction in subscription costs. So you may well, I mean, the classic example is a French fixed line operator called Free that has 30 euros a year, and each year they put more stuff in there to keep people paying 30 rather than dropping the price to 25. And what I expect to see is service providers looking for more stuff, particularly on mobile, to put into the bundle to justify the value. And I talked to one recently that said, what we're doing is we're basically looking at a funnel of 20 possibles, and we're going to pick the 5 that work the best. And it may well be that what WebRTC enables is that they can get cheaper and more effective things that come out the bottom of the bundle, even if none of those 5 services is must-have. They are cheap ways of enhancing the perceived value and therefore loyalty.
So, thought process on the data channel. I mean, we saw the data channel with, CubeSlam and that. I guess I could say those are active data channels where the user knows the data channel is using. Do you think maybe the future of the data channel is almost more hidden? That it's going to be the way we capture stuff in real time all the time from devices? I mean, is that as a potential of this? And what does that open up in terms of devices from either a sensor perspective or just thought processes on that? Is that a radical change?
Sure, let me start on that one. I think there's a couple properties of the data channel that are important to think about. One is the real-time usage of it, and that's what we're seeing for like the games and CubeSlam and being able to get data there quickly and be able to not have data be behind a train of other data that's slowing it down, right? So you can lose data and get data out of sequence. That's really key. But the other thing that we're really seeing with the data channel is a complete change of the web architecture. The web architecture has traditionally been client-server, and we're suddenly talking about being able to move this data back and forth, or between the peers directly. And that enables building like we saw ShareFest earlier this week and on these other applications where we're really moving data around between the clients more. We're not pushing as much data through the data center. That has implications from both a bandwidth issue for the data centers, which is a pretty major cost of a lot of these applications, and also from the point of view of privacy and moving the data around. And people have raised it has lots of security concerns for enterprises and other things about how data will move, but those mostly exist already. So I think that that's going to be a pretty exciting opportunity to suddenly have a new way of doing overlay networks. And I don't think we've gotten our heads around yet the way those overlay networks will be configured and organized. And you start combining that with some of the ideas of where browsers are going, where an application, your browser might be running as soon as your computer boots, and not only when you had that browser page or tab open. You couple a lot of that stuff together, and I think we'll see a very interesting way to roll out applications that wouldn't normally be deployable in that environment that move data in very different ways.
I mean, I think there's going to be an interesting way of if you link the data channel between browsers at the same time as having a local peer-to-peer network connection, particularly over Wi-Fi, then you start having all sorts of interesting things of, you may well find web pages or applications doing their own least cost routing with other people in the room.
Right, sure. If I was a CDN network today, I would be terrified about what this meant to me.
Yeah.
So ultimate CDN, ultimate torrent, if you're kind of like on the positive side, ultimate botnet, ultimate evil, if you're on the, frightened side.
I I mean, that idea of that you can have micro torrents all over the world built with WebRTC, with just somebody putting an indexing server up and using the data channel to move stuff around. It's a very interesting thought process depending upon, again, your viewpoint. Brent?
So one of the questions I have is, there were some hints, and actually there was a device out here where they're implementing the Opus codec, and I heard Avaya say that they might be working on some stuff like that. In your imagination, are you seeing any WebRTC specific devices, or can you imagine any of those coming down the road? We talk about kind of new form factors. I'm just wondering, anything that you're thinking about or seeing, or does it even make sense to do that?
I was lucky enough actually to be at the All Things D conference. Is there anyone here that was at the All Things D conference? The only thing they spoke about was wearables. They're so over this. They're so all over the current form factor. It's wearables. Now there's a question about wearables. I mean, you know, Tim Cook stood up and said that the challenge with the Google Glass is actually people don't wear Google Glasses because they want to. It's because they have a sight problem, and then they become a fashion accessory. So what makes sense from the wearable space? But it was very interesting how there's no conversation really about kind of devices of today.
So that was a great question, and I'm quite excited. I got a device quite recently that I consider to be basically a WebRTC only device. Now, of course, I view that it's an HTML5 device, and its one purpose in life is that here it is. It's a Firefox OS phone, right? And so that's my viewpoint. Of course, I'm sort of biased towards WebRTC, but I think we're going to see lots of devices that have that type of technology built into them, be they TVs, be they embedded devices with a custom display, be them other things. We'll see that as a very common way to build applications.
Yeah, so I mean, that's basically saying there's a general class of web devices. And is WebRTC any more important than WebGL and all the other million bits of HTML5 in that context? Not necessarily. I mean, it depends on the form factor. If it's a then yes.
But I mean, the interesting thing, we talk about webcam, IP webcams that you could put in, and folks like both AT&T and Comcast are doing surveillance. I mean, what about a doorbell that's a WebRTC doorbell that's wireless, that when somebody comes up and clicks on it, now they can talk to you, and it's through WebRTC. I mean, there's an interesting thought process. If you start thinking about WebRTC microphones, the microphone is WebRTC.
The number of conferences I go to where the microphones just don't bloody work.
I think there are some interesting questions. I actually thought that the concept of a WebRTC telephone that could connect, eventually we get some of these WebRTC connection servers like your service, could be connected where it was more like a regular telephone for people who really wanted that in that environment. I think there are a characteristic of WebRTC not in a general purpose device, but in a purpose specific device.
That's kind of what I was thinking too, Phil, is that even though for years, and it's old hat, people have been talking about getting rid of their desk phones, and yet that's still a multi-billion-dollar market for desk phones. And so if this is rolling out, not everybody's going to want to use their client on their PC or their phone, their mobile device to do this. There may be a small market for that in some sense, or in the MDM market. There may be some opportunities for other form factors.
I mean, the obvious one actually is, I think now I think about it, is an audio conference device. I mean, I'm surprised this year we haven't got Plantronics here. I was like Plantronics or Polycom or someone like that.
Or like the the one out here that was the Yamaha little USB one, instead of having and have WebRTC built right into it. That's really interesting. By the way, if anyone is interested, the phone that Jeff had, the dial phone, which has an incredibly easy to use interface, is readily available for $500 for anyone who'd like to buy it, so I don't have to carry it home. So I guess one of the questions that I would ask that I think is very important is, what if anything here was overhyped? Where's the overhype in this? I mean, are we overhyping this? I mean, or are we not? I mean, do we really think the world's going to change, or is there? I mean, we don't. Maybe there's not a contrarian view, but got a question. What do you see as the dangers?
I don't think it's overhyped at all. I mean, we have about 700 people here. I think it was about half size last time we did it. I mean, it's again, I think it's still really, really early. I think it gets to the point though that voice and high quality voice and video are going to be, voice has always been talked about of, one day it just becomes another app. We're not going to charge by the minute. It just runs on data. I mean, I think this certainly accelerates it and puts it basically anywhere you have a data connection. But, I mean, that opens up it does open up a whole world of opportunities. So, like the doorbell, a specific, button for a conference phone. I don't think it necessarily changes the need or the way that people talk. Because that's, a specific IP phone that's now running WebRTC and has different specific buttons. Not that much different, maybe higher quality, maybe easier to innovate and maybe cheaper, but not that much different. But it should be, I look forward to the day where, every website, every digital interaction has a WebRTC component, and it's going to be, there's no download, there's no configuration, there's no sign in, you just boom, and then you're talking to wherever the other side is. And so, again, like the sales and support side just makes a ton of sense because you have all the information and you can actually know where the person is and take care of them. But, I don't think you can really overhype it because it's this amazing technology that's kind of been given to the world for free. And, all the people here and who are here and going to be at the ones in the future are going to figure out cool things to do with it.
I totally disagree with Greg. No. No, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think as someone is overhyped, and not overhyped on what it can become or what this type of impact it'll have or the ways it can be used. But the thing that I find overhyped is where it is today. And this goes back to Craig's comment where we're at the beginning of the first inning or something. We are very early on this. I will give a very concrete example from this conference. First day we arrived, they're blocking ports on the firewall in some weird way. Who knows what was going on in the wireless network. But nobody's application, WebRTC applications worked. And no one had any diagnostics or any reason why they didn't work. They had no idea. And the person to blame for that is, well, me. Okay? The standards don't report up the error codes and the things people need. The applications couldn't deal with it. This stuff is very early. The browsers, you talk to the browser vendors here, and they'll tell you, well, we've just barely got the wheels attached to the car, right? They're barely stuck on. So I think it's very early, and a lot of the things that people are having problems with when I ask them what do they need, well, we're hacking around this, and we had to do this and this and this so we could make it work. And it's like, a year from now, you won't have to do any of that because you shouldn't have had to. You should have had support at a lower layer to do that. So I think that stuff's coming. I don't think it's as far along as we want right now. I think it's easy to make a sort of bleeding edge application with it right now and do early demos and learn about where it is and get stuff going. But I think it's really hard to have an application that would have that you could deploy on a very wide scale without an incredible number of support calls today. That's sort of where I think it is.
I want to iterate something Colin said just before you guys go, because very interesting. So most of you don't know what happened with the network here. So we tested the network. We tested with WebRTC ahead of time, talked to them about how their switches were set up and how you could have between the switches, we could have traffic move and all that. Got here, and we had problems with bandwidth. We started with 10 megabits, went to 20 megas, still had problems with bandwidth. Turned out Wednesday afternoon we started having a lot of conversations, and we figured out a couple of things that were interesting. First is they had PNP blocking turned on, which the assumption we had was that most of the video traffic was going to be peer-to-peer within the network, but they were blocking that. So it was actually turned off. So all the traffic that was running demos was running out to the internet and back in. So if you were trying to do a demo between two stations on the wireless network, it was going to the internet to come back. And so that was the first big problem. The second big problem was that we actually had on the stage for the demos a separate wireless network, but the system here works like a hotel, and it captures the MAC address that you log in with and keeps it in a register for 24 hours. And it turns out if you re-log in, even if you try to log on a different password, it leaves it in the same address. So it turned out everybody who logged in on the free network and tried to use the high-speed network up here for demos on Tuesday night, their devices never went over to the other network. They stayed in the free network, and that's because it's a hospitality type system. So one of the things, by the way, and Colin, I blame quite frankly, I learned that. No, it was a learning for me, and we learned that these places run like a hotel, and if you want to run high quality video and that in this kind of an environment, you've got to go through and talk about the things that you got. But it is very important that there were no tools on Tuesday to tell us anything. It took basically me sitting down with some folks and knowing quite a bit about how this stuff works to figure out what the problems were on Wednesday. So you're absolutely right.
And I think there's a message there for everybody that runs networks or sells equipment to network providers or anything. What we've really done is we've made communications from an experience point of view incredibly easy. Now we've got to make networks incredibly easy to work with the communications experiences. And the ones who can do networks that way kind of will be very well positioned to be the preferred supplier of that network. So,
I think in terms of what's being overhyped, I think mobile WebRTC, whether it's over Wi-Fi, but particularly over cellular, is going to take longer than people think. There's going to be a ton of complexities around battery life, notifications, signaling, coexistence with various aspects of the network. And the classic, I still haven't had a good answer to the problem that was floated 2 years ago, particularly on mobile, which is the sort of which of these apps is ringing at me. There's the user interface side of it. There's a ton of RF nastiness, whether it's on Wi-Fi or 3G, 4G, and none of that's going to be impossible, but I think it's going to take a while to fix.
So back to the analysis of business models. For example, the Uber conference, you have a freemium model. And by the way, I've tried that. It sounded fantastic. Actually, it really is a surprise for a guy that has looked at conferencing for like 12 years or 13 years and have heard everything under the sun. It was really remarkably good. So we saw, we have these freemium models that we see and that you're participating in, and there's a bunch of people out here that are doing the same thing. What's the driver to go over the top? Because I think Phil said he's on your system, but he's not buying the Pro. Any thoughts there as to what's going to move people away from at least a little bit, enough people so that you can stay alive?
Yeah, so what's going to convert them to pay? Our Google Voice was always free. We did make money on international calls, which was enough to actually cover the cost mostly. The way we look at it is we want to give everyone an excellent experience, and if you don't want to pay, that's great. You can have an excellent experience up to some limited number of people. I think we currently have it a little too high. I think you can, as a free person, you can get up to 17 free people on your call, which is kind of a random number.
I'm at 11. So
It's why use anything
else. I like
else,
Greg a lot.
So you've jumped through our hoops. But at the end of the day, we let you do other stuff. We let you remove our branding. We let you get a local number. We let you go up to 100 people on a call. We let you set it so the system will dial out to start the call. So there's hopefully enough reasons for people to do it. But literally, it's the nice thing is it's we've been doing this for a while, so it's not ridiculously expensive of a service to provide. And when you look at kind of like the way telephony to me is kind of the gift that keeps on giving, because users have been somewhat abused by their service providers forever, charged a ton of money. If you go to your largest telco's website today and try to do anything other than pay your bill or order services, and there's not much you can do. So we think by having a very attractive price, killer features, high quality, and engaging UI and design, that people will be happy. And $10 a month when they're used to paying $29 a month is actually a pretty good deal.
Any other thoughts on monetizing, going from the freemium to the premium, so to speak?
So we've been working on making voice be free for 20 years roughly or whatever. It's been quite a while, and really a lot of companies have made really a lot of money on the transition from where it was to free, and that'll continue. Craig's the perfect example of that.
So done there? So there's a question, actually, this came up, I think, so to be fair, I think Dean sent this in. Do you see audio and video devices being used for non-call applications? I was interested. Things like biometrics, sensors, diagnosis of breathing, some of those kinds of things. It's an interesting question to say, we're now creating these devices that have sensors, and I mean, it's a combination of microphones, cameras, accelerometers, location things. And WebRTC lets us integrate those in very different ways in real time. And is this going to be very interesting as an application for the future?
I think it's going to be interesting in some situations. I mean, I've heard examples of people using cameras in either webcams or in TV bezels to try and work out with, let's say you've got an older person with Alzheimer's, to work out if they're in a particular room or not. You can almost use it as a motion sensor. And so I think there's going to be a lot of niche examples there where you can, it might be using something for CCTV, it might be using it as essentially a burglar alarm. Yeah, it depends if you start plugging it in with a clever algorithm to do audio or video processing. I mean, the example I gave there was, I think there are companies now that will use a smartphone's microphone to diagnose sleeping problems by, you put your phone on your pillow and it listens to the way you breathe during the night and breathing patterns and can diagnose certain medical conditions. So I think that there's a set of quite interesting possibilities, particularly in perhaps emerging markets where you're not going to have sophisticated equipment to do a full medical diagnosis. You could perhaps use a smartphone. Now, the question then is it specifically WebRTC? Maybe. Or is it just an app that behaves the same way as a million other apps today? Good question.
Upgrading a power meter today to be networked into a smart grid type system costs somewhere around $500 or $700. Slamming a video camera in front of them and feeding the images up to a cloud to read the meter off the video image is almost nothing. Oh, sorry. Thank you. There? That working?
I don't know, you sounded pretty good to me. Yeah, like you can think of like baby monitors and drop cams and I mean all the things that are now somewhat available. I kind of back to the point, I don't think they're necessarily WebRTC makes them what they're going to be, but cheap video and ubiquitous Wi-Fi and the ability to to use the cameras that are out there, or use the Microsoft, the Xbox Connect camera to monitor a room. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do.
It's a parent's wet dream, right? Where you not only can you monitor where your kids are with their phone, you can turn the camera and microphone on anytime you want and monitor them wherever they are. Wonderful thought process.
Well, we have this weird, I've got a jawbone up, this weird emotion at the moment. Everyone at the AT&T Foundry's gone out and got jawbone up, right? So this measures my sleep patterns. So I know how much deep sleep I have, light sleep, when I'm awake, it's a bit freaky. Then we all join teams, and then we socially share our patterns, and now we're having conversations of, well, do I really want my workmates to know when I'm not sleeping? And it's really interesting socially, kind of like these conversations. Now, if you block your sleep off, then you want to block your sleep off. So it's, I think we're already there, so the simple answer is yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Brent?
So we had a number of end users that came to the conference, actually far more than I was expecting. I asked in one of the sessions how many were there, and it was about half of the audience. And so we've talked about, this is kind of early days still, just a little bit. What advice would you give to these people as they go home from this conference? What would you recommend that they tell their teams about WebRTC?
I think the important thing to do is think about how you can use that technology, how it changes deployment, how it changes what devices you can work on, how it changes your development process, and think about where it makes sense. What would you do differently when this technology is all there? And look for those types of things and think about how to start that in process, investigating those, trying new apps, using this technology in new ways. I think there's lots of things to think about, but that's probably the high runner for me.
I would say think about it from a design point of view as well as a technical and engineering point of view, and actually talk to people who design the user interaction flow through websites and think about how does that fit alongside what we'd normally do in a call center. Because if you do take the view that you're going to see an ever closer linking and the sort of contextual communications we've been talking about, there's got to be a lot of thought going into how that changes the experience of someone navigating a website, for example, that perhaps is not something that the voice people within an organization have traditionally thought about.
Yeah, and I was trying to work out when you said end users, end users, so I'll say the people that have come here to try and understand how they should get ahead of the curve from a business point of view. I think one interesting observation I have from this week is that I think we're still very linear thinking in how we're approaching the changes to behavior that are potentially, going to be capturing money. And what's very interesting to me is that we're very linear thinking into spaces that is trending to free anyway. So it's not only linear, but so the answer to the business model, we're in phase one of revenue and value, revenue destruction, value maintenance. I think the interesting part is to maybe try and put yourself in a different space of thought that says, how can you reapply? One thing where we do spend a lot of time is when you get different domains together, you usually get completely different kind of opportunity spaces, so that I would do something like that.
I'm going to take the non-panelists for a second. I think that's actually the interesting point is all the leap breakthroughs, almost all the breakthroughs have not been caused by linear technology thinking. They've been caused by someone saying, let's list the top 10 problems we have to making revenue. Let's talk the top 10 cost problems, and can this technology help change those? I think that's how you got to think that way, because that's going to cause you not to think about how do you do video cheaper, but how do you transform a part of your business? That's how you invent. If you look at the real technology inventions of the web, they were mainly driven like that. They were not driven by somebody thinking of how to make AOL better. They were a fundamental change. So
we've done some work for some organizations. We've asked people about this idea of implementing communications into your business processes. And the interesting thing that we saw almost across the board is that people would say, I'm waiting for my vendor to do that in whatever I'm using, whether it's Oracle software or Salesforce or some other thing. They're typically waiting for that vendor because business transformation is very difficult. And people often don't think at that strategic level very often, like you just mentioned, Phil. So that's just an observation from the real world of working in the unified communications space. That was one of the arguments where you hear this CEBP, Communications-Enabled Business Processes. How many folks have done it? Very few.
So just a quick comment, because someone asked me on a panel actually in Barcelona, because what we were saying was the revenue opportunities is with reinvention of enterprise process. And they said, do you have any advice to how to accelerate your ability to traction inside enterprise? And the advice, the feeling we have is the last people you go to is the IT organization that's defending today's business process. You go to the business people, and they're already doing it with BYOD and everything else. Everyone's using these other tools. I have an $800 a month laptop that they've locked down so much that it kind of like props my desk up. So I have to use Dropbox to put all my confidential stuff and share it, right? But we're paying $800 a month. So the change is going to come from the people who derive the most value.
I think we're going to see enterprises move from bring your own device to bring your own contact center. Using this. It'll be, you know what, the one we've got is too clunky, the people running it are too clunky, I'll do it myself.
Well, I think it's going to be an interesting time when the small businesses end up having better processes and more interesting technology and being more effective and efficient than the big ones. And anyone with an IT department or a CIO and where you're waiting for your Oracle or your SAP or something else to enable something, the small guys are going to be doing it with something that may not be as reliable in that it hasn't been around as long, but it'll be the more innovative stuff and it'll be the more interesting stuff, and they'll actually be more productive and they'll have happier workers. So it's kind of a unique time where it's totally flipping.
So one small little comment on that. So Val Matula from Avaya gave a presentation and was on a panel here this afternoon. And he made some really great points about disruption in the contact center and how, just as an example, if you have a browser that updates automatically and that's running through your contact center is kind of dead, sort of, as those things are updating depending upon the time. So there's all kinds of little issues with with some of this stuff, you know, with as you move into real significant production environments. That's all.
So I'm going to have a little prerogative to ask the last question. And so just, someone asked you, what was the most interesting thing you learned, the most interesting session you went to, the most interesting demo you saw, the one thing that you walked away from saying, that was something that surprised me from this event, what would it be? And so I tell you what, Brent, I'm going to start on your end.
Oh, you mean I
and
get
let
to
you come-
answer
you
the
get to answer the
question?
question. This is a question for as part of the panel. Just kind of, you know, what was it? What was the thing that you said that surprised me?
Well, if I can take a little liberty, I'll say two things. The thing that surprised me is how, even though we're immature here, is how mature we were. There was so much that I saw that I thought was just awesome. And in particular, one of the demos, the one that got Best of Show award, man, that was awesome. And so those are a couple of the thoughts that I'm taking home, is that, yeah, we're immature, but gosh, we're far down the road. And then there's some awesome demos going on here.
I would say it's the number of companies that are in the middle of this sort of ecosystem, helping others accelerate. And I think the fact that there's a dozen companies with APIs and cloud platforms, there's some of the stuff which is coming out from vendors who are traditionally service providers selling, you know, big iron, who also have client-side bits and pieces. There seems to be a determined effort to hide even more of the complexity from whether it's developers or service providers or end users, and we've got this tier of companies emerging on a almost weekly basis. I've seen a lot of them here who are trying to sort of help everyone else run to keep up.
Yeah, and I think I'd just simply build on Dean's statement, actually. My feeling is that this is like looking after a 6 to 18-month-old baby. I think we need to take care of it, and we need to not go back to our old behaviors of protecting something that won't exist anyway, but try and find a new way to do something that we can't do today. And it amazes me to this point how well we are doing that so far. I think this event is very interesting. We've doubled the size. My feedback that I've given to you guys is kind of let's make sure we maintain the honesty of the conversation and not corrupt the platform. Because if we do that, the platform isn't going to die. It's going to go elsewhere anyway. And it would be much more interesting for the community to shepherd it correctly.
The point that struck me the most is when I asked people, you know, what's missing that you need to go achieve your business success, the answer was pretty much not much across the board. And I think that gives me, you know, really high expectations for what we'll see 6 months from now when we meet.
Yeah, the thing that I kind of mentioned it earlier, the thing that I was, to echo some of what was just said, is you know, there's a lot of growth just in the last 6 months, that, you know, again, from where we were in South San Francisco to where we are today, and the types of demos we saw then to the types of demos today, they really, I mean, it was really, really polished. And, you know, it's nice. It's never really been the technology that differentiates stuff. It's always been, you know, how you package it as a product, how you tie it together, how you support it, how you price it, you know, how you work with vendors, and how you design it and have, you know, usability and all those things. But it definitely like raises the bar for everyone. Like, you know, the rising tide floats all boats. So like now we can hopefully, you know, check off the box of, okay, it's going to be a really high quality audio video connection. So what are we going to do with that? And I think now what's kind of like the real baby is where's WebRTC on mobile, and where's that going to, you know, when we do this in 6 months or a year from now, I think you'll see a lot of the demos of that, as opposed to, you know, I think Vonage is the only guy to really crack it on mobile so far. So I was most interested in that because I think mobile's really going to be a neat place for this.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.